Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our second session, the role of belief in social life. We have with us our honorable guests. Mr. Adeni will not be able to join, unfortunately, but Mohammad Azharul Islam from National University of Dhaka, Andi Faisal Bakti from Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Aishatu Abubakar Kumo from Gombe State University, Gombe, and Fatima Ghani from Forman Christian College University, Pakistan, will be joining, inshallah. So we welcome our dear speakers. We are excited to hear your valuable papers. Inshallah, our first presenter will be Mr. Mohammad Azharul Islam from National University of Dhaka, Bangladesh, and his topic will be Demystifying the Dynamism of Nursi's Approach to Belief in Contemporary Society. Each presenter will have 15 minutes, and inshallah, in the end of the session, we will receive the questions from our audience, and we'll be distributing it to the respective presenters. So, Mr. Mohammed, the stage is yours, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Am I audible to all of you?
Come again, please.
Am I audible to all of you? Can
Yes,
you hear me?
Audible. Yes, yes.
Okay. Can I share my PowerPoint?
Yes, please. Only the PowerPoint part, please. And for those who are not speaking, please, you can mute yourselves.
Oh, sorry, it says only the host can share this.
1 second. Okay, our technicians are taking care of this. Sorry for the delay. Can you please try again, Mr. Mohammed? Mr. Mohammed, can you please try again to share your screen?
Yes, I am trying. It is working, I think, now.
Mr. Mohammed, you will select share screen, you'll click on it, and then you have to select the PowerPoint, not the whole screen. So if you can go with the share screen icon, just in the middle, in the below pane, you will see share screen.
Yes, I saw it. I'm trying.
Yeah. Is it not accepting?
It's working just 30 seconds. What?
Okay, what I suggest would be, let's start with our next speaker until Mr. Mohammad.
May I try without showing the PowerPoint, just speak?
Yes, maybe it's about the internet speed, so you can continue without the presentation, if that's okay for you as well. Please.
Okay. Thank you so much, learned, dear professor, respected professor, another wonderful guest and audience. Thank you so much for giving me the floor to present this important topic for the contemporary society. My title, what the professor already said, that demystifying the dynamism of Nursian approach to belief in contemporary society. Firstly, I would like to portray the introduction. Firstly, that Ustad Bediuzzaman Said Nursi, without being vexed by the various or diversified jurisprudential discourses, he spontaneously employed his magnificent efforts to safeguard and fortify the belief of individuals in omnipotent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He particularly articulated that belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the focal point of Islam as Din al-Fitrah. And this fabric of faith contains the potential to constitute an ideal society. And more importantly, as a very first-sighted Islamic thinker and scholar, Ustad, in his magna opus Risale-i or the Epistle of Life, he vehemently argued and maintained that fundamentals of belief, that is, usul al-iman, must be given paramount importance over all other types of consideration. Instead of investing his time, merit, and energy to explicate the subtleties or intricacies involved in the theology, jurisprudence, as well as the establishment of Caliphate, he uniquely diagnosed the crisis of the Ummah and diseases of the humanity, especially the Muslims, as the byproduct of materialism, naturalism, communism, imperialism, nationalistic statecraft, and so on. He observed the plights of individuals or human beings as a naturally corollary of these ideologies, which brought nothing but strain, socio-psychological depression, spiritual crises, and estrangement. So now I'm going to decipher the nature of belief or iman portrayed by the Ustad Bediuzzaman Said Nursi. Ustad magnificently articulated the interrelation as well as the interdependence between belief, that is iman, as well as the submission, that is Islam, with the objective of devising a very important means for the salvation of human beings from the shackles of materialism as well as alien ideologies. He strongly argues and believes that just as Islam without belief cannot be the means of salvation, neither belief without Islam may be the means of salvation. So Islam is taking the part of the truth and is submission and obedience to it. And he also focused on the intertextuality of the revealed book, that is the Quran, and the created book, that is the universe, or a sort of Uber Quran, encapsulated as mighty Quran inscribed by divine power. And he called for, which is called the universe. And this is the most crucial key to decode the divine read, inevitably essential to fulfill that divine trust. And he also drew a very important distinction between affirmative belief, which is regarded as tahqiqi iman, also labeled as belief by investigation or conscious verification of belief, and belief by imitation. taqlidi iman, blindly emulating or following the ancestors. Ustad stated, taqlidi iman could be easily negated by the skepticism of the scientific age. Instead of mere criticizing the taqlidi iman, Ustad Said Nursi for its dreadful consequences and representation, Ustad, unlike other scholars, uniquely was looking for a short way to obtain firm faith and a complete understanding of Islam that would not be shaken by the attacks of various or variegated damaging currents of the alien ideologies. And in response to these explorations, he expands how the Risale-i was bestowed on him, which is a very safe, in the words of Ustad, which is a safe, short way, inspired by the Quran for the believers of present time. And for Ustad, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not come to an end at the mere utterance of the declaration of faith, that is La ilaha illallah. Rather, the journey for fortification of belief and knowledge commences or heralds at the at time of shahada, declaration of faith in Islamic paradigm. We all know that every negating dimension of Islamic faith contained in the word La in Arabic, that is no, is a gateway to the positive truth, which is realized by lifting the veil, wrapping it, covering it. Therefore, believers should remark on to bring about the realization of faith or belief through contemplative thought and knowledge, and not only engrossed in its imitation on its following. And Ustad ardently stated, every fruit is a seal of unity, and that makes known the writer and maker of the earth or the globe, universe is free, and the book of the divine, book of the universe is guarded. It demonstrates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's or his unity, and shows to the number of fruits the seal affixed to the degree of unity. And Ustad Said Nursi spectacularly demonstrated that paramount menace fronting Muslim Ummah in the contemporary period emanates not from the believers, disbelievers in him, but from the naturalistic science and alien philosophy being spread in the Muslim community by those individuals, particularly who work in disguise to sow the seeds of doubts, confusions, and incredulity about faith, about belief. And after observing these challenges, Ustad uttered with candid confidence that faith is a bounty fashioned and bestowed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on humans, which no human endeavors can impede or snatch away. Most importantly, his firm conviction was that religious disposition is an inherent trait of human personality. And now we would like to focus on other different aspects of the framework of belief advanced by Ustad Said Nursi. One of them is intellectual responses to existential dilemma. Bediuzzaman Said Nursi, being a very proic Islamic thinker, felt that very important that modern mind must be enlightened with the elixir of the Quran in such a fashion, in such a manner that both their hearts and intellects are contented, since without this answer to the existential dilemma fronting postmodern individuals cannot be conveyed. The answers to the very existential dilemmas, namely, who am I, where am I from, what must I do here, where am I going, and what will happen when I die, can only be satisfactorily presented before the skeptic minds, restless minds, with the help of a new methodology in Quranic exegesis or tafsir, one that would benefit from the advancements in the field of the secular knowledge, so that the Ummah could withstand the challenges of materialism and philosophical alienation from the Quran. So that's very important. Ustad also demonstrated that if luminaries such as Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, Shah Naqshbandi, and Imami Rabbani were alive today, Ustad continued, they would expend all their efforts in strengthening the truths of belief and tenets of Islam, for they are the means to eternal happiness. If there exists deficiency, if there is deficiency in them, it results in eternal misery. A person without belief may not enter paradise, but many have gone to paradise without Sufism. That's very important as far as that is concerned. Second aspect, we can argue what Ustad has been portrayed in the Risale-i, engendering a culture of belief. Said Nursi's thought-provoking thoughts on the indispensability of faith did not originate in a vacuum. Rather, his superb message and methodologies were inevitably informed by the socio-political as well as cultural context in which he found himself. And Ustad's very important point is that his ultimate intention was to provide and disseminate the cutting-edge interpretation of the Quranic messages and miracles to fortify the belief of individuals in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He essentially intends to free individuals from the bondage of Western despicable ideas and engender a culture of belief upon which modern and successful society might base itself. Third aspect, we can present that Ustad's refutation of despicable alien ideologies and reinforcing the faith of individuals. We know that in modern period or in modern era, the faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submission to his omnipotence have become the target of skeptics, and the thoughts like the death of God and humanism replace the centrality of God with that of man and material. Ustad has focused on that particular point very efficaciously. Given the social milieu in his lifetime, to encounter this sort of ideologies and to strengthen the belief of individuals, he delved himself into philosophical hermeneutics to overcome a distance, as well as to use distanciation as both obstacle and the instrument in order to reform the initial event of discourse in a new event of discourse that will claim to be both faithful as well as creative. That's very important. And Ustad Said Nursi pedantically elucidated the situation of that time, that means which was existing in Turkey at that time and other parts of the Muslim world, that the desperate onslaught on Islamic paradigm of beliefs was conducting by Western modern civilization, relying on the wings of humanistic, materialistic ideologies, basically rooted in Darwinism. And Ustad has splendidly encountered these challenges. And very importantly, that means we know that history has demonstrated before ourselves that modern human beings found essentially themselves in the grip of psychological stress, spiritual crisis, as well as a terrible vacuum. Turkish Republic, as for example, after its establishment, became the spontaneous prey, became the prey to materialism, Darwinism, Freudism, existentialism, and the policymakers, without understanding or comprehending the crisis of Western civilization, branded Islam as the sole reason of backwardness. Ustad candidly, boldly raised his voice to demonstrate that Islam is not the reason of backwardness. Rather, given this backdrop, Ustad Said Nursi called for a new kalam or Islamic scholasticism that would address modern faith questions arising out of encounters with the Western values and ideologies. To Ustad Said Nursi, for the appropriate rebuttal of these challenges, Islamic scholasticisms were required to be invigorated and revitalized through a scrupulous or meticulous study of modern science, along with the apposite or appropriate understanding of religious sciences. since he firmly believed that no contradiction, in fact, existed between Quran and sciences. And enlightened understanding through this way could pave the way for the Ummah to encounter the challenges of Western materialism and other ideologies. For this, Ustad Said Nursi poured into, composed Risale-i Nur and produced a very new methodology and hermeneutics in Quranic exegesis to renew and strengthen the faith and belief of individuals in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ustad was very much hopeful and that this Risale-i Nur is really capable of encountering the challenges. Nowadays, we are observing the fruits of the Risale-i Nur. And another aspect we can argue, belief as an elixir to ensure inner peace, happiness, and tranquility. We all know that reinforcement of belief or strengthening the belief is the grand key to unlock the realm of happiness and is more precious than experiencing hundreds of or thousands of illuminations and spiritual delights. Belief in the divine unity is a must for ensuring happiness, tranquility, and inner peace. And Ustad, we know that Ustad has argued that, or we can say that in the words of Ustad, the evil commanding, he basically, you know that Ustad has a very unique narrative style, symbolic style to portray a story. Ustad Said Nursi portrays the evil commanding soul after presenting an illustration of two brothers. That evil commanding soul of first brother has prepared a sword of hell for him, while the good intention, goodwill, good character, good thoughts of other brother had allowed him to receive great bounty and happiness and shining virtue and prosperity. And employing this unique symbolic narrative style, Ustad Said Nursi, after narrating the story of two brothers, who upon approaches, basically we found that who upon approaching a fork on the road are informed that on the road to the right, one is compelled to comply with law and order, but within that hardship is security and happiness. On the left road, there is freedom and no restraint, but with his freedom lies danger and wretchedness. Now the choice is yours. So Ustad has tried to basically trick the minds or storm the brain of or the intellects of the human being. Ustad, in his second and eighth verse of the Risale-i Nur, elucidated the fashion in which belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala affects human life, thought, attitude, and manner. In the second word, he magnificently proclaimed that happiness, tranquility, and bounty are to be found in a Muslim's faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So after enumerating the story of two men on a journey for business and pleasure, one choosing the selfish way and the other godly one, Ustad asserts that the selfish way consists of conceit, fraud, arrogance, self-centeredness, making oneself cynical and pessimistic and distrustful to others, resulting in a gloomy world view. So the person who is observing the world only in mere physical, material, or carnal terms perceive everyone as his enemy and views life as a torment. Ustad Nursi therefore advanced the idea that unbelief conceals the seed of a jackum, the tree of hell as portrayed in the Quran. On the other hand, or on the contrary, the God-conscious and devout person views the world affably and with joy and enthusiasm. So that's very important. And another aspect, we could argue that individuals' faith vis-a-vis peace and security of the collective. We all know that protection and reinforcement or strengthening the belief of individual was the key point in Nursian approach to belief. However, it would be quite illusory or illogical to think that or assume that Ustad didn't think of any nexus between individuals' faith and collective societal order and cohesion. Rather, Ustad stressed that to attain the standard of belief, standard level of faith, and to reinforce the relationship between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and human beings as his vicegerent and public order and social harmony or public harmony are sine qua non. So he being consciously cognizant of the severe threats of chaotic social order resulting from unbelief, he was in favor of encouraging the establishment of a stable public order and social solidarity. However, his first and foremost focus was individuals' reform, which inevitably necessitate the establishment of a very good order after understanding the oneness in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he was in favor of the establishment of a very strong, stable public order to avoid socio-political anarchy, chaos, as well as disturbances. He states five principles.
You have 2 more minutes for wrapping up.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, I'll try my level best to finish. He states that these 5 principles are necessary, essential at this strange time in order to save the social life to this nation from anarchy. These are respect, compassion, refraining from what is prohibited or haram, security, and the giving up of lawlessness and being obedient to the authority. That's very important, even in the postmodern world, in a pluralistic global order. So we could say that through a scrupulous study and holistic understanding of the divine scriptures, along with the cosmic book, that is the Kitab-i Kainat, Ustad advanced the idea that mutual forbearance, love, reverence, and empathy are required to be fostered prudently for the establishment and maintenance of public order, social security, as well as peace. And to him, individual faith, if nurtured appositely within the normative framework of Islam, will contribute to the flourishment of aforesaid qualities in all spheres of human life, beginning from families to state, and will facilitate, certainly, to reduce the social strain to an absolute minimum. That's very important. So he, instead of seeking any political power, endeavored to enkindle the faith in the inner world of individuals, so that the individuals ultimately could contribute to establish a just society. So Ustad Said Bediuzzaman Nursi, I am now concluding that he devoted huge swaths of the Risale-i to articulate exposition of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the prism of existential arguments. The inexorable chemistry existing between revelation and reason has been successfully demystified and explicated by him to quench the thirst of contemporary Muslim Ummah and the modern minds to safeguard and fortify their belief in omnipotent Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was essentially accomplished to the Risale-i Nur. And the brilliant tenor of his writing is, we all know that, full of farsightedness, vigor, and eloquence, and it wonderfully unveiled the mystery of divine scripture as vis-a-vis the book of creation or Kitab-i Kainat, to unscramble the relevance of religious belief in an era where Muslims fronted the severe onslaught of naturalism, dialectic materialism, Freudianism, humanism in the guide of modernization. These thoughts are still very relevant and very much essential for the Muslim Ummah to save themselves from the despicable menace which is still entrapped that means Muslim Ummah, beginning from personal to global level. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your kind patience for giving me the time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So we thank Mr. Mohammad Azharul Islam for his quite intense and energetic presentation. I personally enjoyed it. I took my notes. I have one question for him personally. So our next speaker will be Mr. Andi Faisal Bakti from Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, Indonesia. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin wa bihi nasta'inu ala umuri dunya wa din wa salatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'du. Our respected chair, Ismail Latif, Hacınebioğlu, and my colleagues, Mohammad Azharul Islam and Fatimah Ghani from Pakistan, and Aishatu Abubakar Kumo from Nigeria. while our colleague Adeni won't be able to make it as something to do with medical reason. Okay, my presentation topic is the role of belief in building social economic balance based on the concept of self and social contribution in Nursi's collection communication perspective. And I have 15 slides only, and although my paper is a bit long, 24 pages, so I'll go to the main points only. So the presentation will be 4 sections. Number 1 is my abstract, and then the second, concept of self. The third is social contribution, and the last part is discussion and conclusion. And for this introduction, sorry, I have to hide this. Okay, the relationship between the concept of self and social contribution in Islam is determined, among others, by the one's faith, prayer, and zakah or almsgiving as a sign of piety. One of the elements of taqwa, piety in the Quran, is iman, faith, in caring for others, both material and non-material, while the material elements refer to material possessions, wealth, and finances, and the non-material ones include the help related to emotions, mentality, and spirituality that is given to others. And the word other refers to relatives, orphans, poor people, travelers, students, and of course Muslim beggars, debtors, and slaves to be freed. We must ensure that the social assistance or contribution is of the same quality that we ourselves would appreciate. These social contributions have a dual purposes. Number 1 is to help others on the one hand, and to purify the donor's self and wealth, because others have right to their wealth on the others. And this paper discusses Said Nursi's position in his Risale-i Nur on this issue. In this paper, which adopts qualitative analysis methods, which is indexical and textual analysis approaches, will be applied systematically. The concept of self and gifts are comprehensively examined in Nursi's works and categorized into new classification according to perspective of Islamic communication of information that I call tabligh, social change, tagir, technology development, tankir, and community formation, which is ummah. The concept of self and social contribution is found in the flashes, Light 19, Letter 22, Signs of Miraculousness, and in Nursi's biography, which clearly elaborates on the role of zakah in the social and economic development. And research shows that Nursi emphasizes the importance of believing in the unseen and giving alms, which is zakah, donation, wakaf, for the development of mankind, both economically and socially, in order to increase the spiritual goals of the life in this world and in the hereafter. Okay. Okay, in Islam, the principle of taqwa, piety, becomes very central in human life, because without piety, a human cannot return peacefully to his origin in the sky, heaven. However, this piety is very often interpreted as too sacred, sky high, and spiritual. The connotation is always or more in the aspect of mahda, pure worship. The fulfillment of some of the pillars of Islam, yeah, the principle of taqwa, the fulfillment of some of the pillars of I cannot see. In fact, the horizontal piety is also the same portion as the vertical aspect. And Bakti has explained how both aspects are important to be fulfilled by a Muslim in particular and humans in general to reaccess the heavenly realm. There are 7 vertical aspects, which include the pillars of faith, or hablum min Allah, believe in Allah, His angels, His apostles, and prophets, yeah. And vengeance, and His good and bad destiny, and the 5 daily prayers and tahajjud, night prayers, while other 7 horizontal elements include hablum minan nas, sharing with others, commitment with promises, being patient in navigating life, controlling angry emotions, forgiving others' mistakes, not repeating known mistakes, and doing ihsan, doing good deeds to the environment, and including the human beings. Yeah. Okay, for this paper, the author focuses on the horizontal aspect of piety, especially on the importance of sharing with others as a form of real social contribution in human development. This last aspect includes material assets, economic, property, wealth, and finance, and non-material aspect, that is social, which include emotions and spirituality and mentality. The next one is the directions of this humanitarian development is self-maturity, which has an effect on the realization of one's concern to contribute socially in improving the people's economy. Communication between humans, social change, community development, technology development, and human civilization is clear manifestation. If this is achieved well in this world, then the role of faith in the development of social economic balance based on the self-concept of people who sincerely contribute as contained in the Risale-i Nur by Said Nursi can be revealed using these communication lenses. This paper attempts to answer the following major questions. What is the role of trust in building the socio-economic balance of the Ummah based on the self-concept and social contribution in Risale-i Nur from a communication perspective? In other words, what is Said Nursi's view of self-concept in relation to religious beliefs in terms of communication, especially information, social change, development, and civilization of the people? With 4 communication approaches: information, social change, community development, and civil society development, Risale-i Nur sees the role of trust as very central in creating socio-economic balance of the people. With belief in Allah and other supernatural beings, humans can show the essence of their self so that a high nature of generosity emerges to fellow humans and other creatures. This is a form of piety that combines its vertical and horizontal aspects. Number 1, information aspect. Syed Nursi sees self-concept and social contribution as a unified whole. Both are seen as something that has a bottom-up and internal meaning. For Nursi, everyone has a different and varied understanding of the instructions, Hudan. Each has different tastes, inclinations, and pleasures in understanding the whole instruction received. Awareness of each person is also different. Someone, when looking at an object, he will see it beautiful, but the other is not. Likewise, the views between nations. A nation will really appreciate something, but other nations don't even pay attention. Even the opposite happens. The important thing is that every human being can reflect on its meaning for himself and his people. His reflections do not conflict with local customs and the goals of Islamic law. Self that is satisfied, thrifty, grateful, and praying as a form of piety is a source of caring attitude to others. Satisfaction strengthens self-esteem, improves work ethic, and gives birth to people's care. Humans are like palaces, which are complete with facilities to communicate with surrounding creatures and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These all show the active reception model in communication. Number 2, aspects of social change. Syed Nursi emphasized the importance of change that comes from within the community, not from outside or from above. Every member of the community is required to improve themselves, which in turn can have an effect on strengthening the community. Dependence on others is self-depreciation, deprecation. That is not recommended. Every member of society can be not excessive, not extravagant, and not greedy. The economic balance of the community can be realized through their internal strengthening, which can then give birth to members who are independent and aware and care about the surrounding community. Zakah and alms giving are the key to balance between rich and poor, so that class differences are no longer visible. The spending what you have, both material and non-material, is a prerequisite for the birth of a strong community. Zakat is a bridge. With zakat, the affection and generosity of the upper class towards the common people, as well as the respect and obedience of the common people towards the upper class, will arise. In short, changes in society that occur from within due to self-awareness to be independent are a manifestation of active reception in social change. Number 3, technology development. Although there is little discussion about this relation to zakah, for example, about the importance of technology, Syed Nursi encourages people to always be creative and innovative in life. Reflecting on the miracles of the prophets, Syed Nursi linking it with advanced technology that can be realized by humans for the service and welfare of the people. Internal products must be optimized and utilized as much as possible for the benefit of their respective citizens. Indeed, the North or West is successful in technology, namely the positive aspects of the West, but there are also negative elements such as the tendency to use believers for their glory. They encourage the faithful not to pay zakah, practice usury and other acts of exploitation. Therefore, spiritual warriors unite in fortifying themselves from this temptation. This is an implementation of the active reception model in development communication. Okay, the last one, this is the end of my presentation, formation of civil society. Syed Nursi supports a civilized community, the effective way of reconciliation between classes, which can bring them closer together. In the payment of zakat, one of the pillars of Islam, and the enforcement of fair and firm rules in the administration of society. Only people like this can stand up for themselves and compete with other nations. This society is, of course, still open to cooperating with anyone for the good and the welfare of the people. This is strong indication of the importance of active reception model in the formation of civil society and civil community. Okay, thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andi Faisal. It was such an informative presentation, and we enjoyed it a lot. Thanks a lot. Our next speaker will be Shukran jazilan. So our next speaker will be Dr. Aishatu Abubakar Kumo, but she's unfortunately having some connection problems. So we're going to change the order of the presentations. So I'm going to ask Ms. Fatima Ghani whether she's ready for the next session. So if
Sure.
yes, please, you can go ahead with your presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum everyone. The topic that I chose for this study was the assessment of the secularization thesis in a globalized world. And this was all done from lens of Bediuzzaman Sayyid Nursi's work, as well as sociology. So first, let's look at the primary purposes of the study. The paper aimed to essentially explore the secularization thesis in the context of Risale-i and the discipline of sociology. So it is very important to understand that the scope of Risale-i or Nursi's body of works transcends beyond just a conversation of faith. It is also about a socio-political context at large, and this is what exactly the paper was aiming to look at. Moreover, the paper also aimed to compare and contrast the social change occurring today in addition to the decline of the Ottoman Empire. The reason that the Ottoman Empire is a very significant point of social change is because it is almost a stimulus for starting off Risale-i. It was the social condition which gave birth to Risale-i and the body of works that existed. So recognizing the similarity of the social change that happened at the time of the Ottoman Empire's decline, comparing to what the nature of the social change is today, it helps us understand that the nature of the problems that Muslims faced back then are quite similar to the problems they're facing right now. And because of that comparison, we're able to implement and contextualize Nursi's studies much more effectively. And lastly, the paper aimed to redefine modern Islamic identity in the context of Risale-i Nur. So understanding that secularization has damaged the sense of Islamic identity, the sense of Muslim identity on both a collective and individual level, requires for us to have a more proactive approach towards it. And that proactive approach is suggested in light of Risale-i Nur, as well as possible problems being highlighted by the discipline of sociology. Looking at the method, this paper was primarily a literature review, with Risale-i Nur being the most primary source, the other ones research papers and journal articles on Syed Nursi's body of work, and then lastly, sociological studies and books focusing on the works of Huntington, Berger, Weber, Ritzer, etc. Huntington, because the clash of civilization gives adequate political context to place the Muslim civilization with respect to other civilizations, be it the Western one, be it the Chinese civilization, and essentially make effective comparisons. Berger became important because we were talking about desacralization in an era where secularization is happening. We see extremely contradictory trends of fundamentalism also coming about. And why would that may be the case is something that is explored when Berger is discussed. And when looking at Weber, we understand that rationalization that has come about due to secularization and due to positivism is not necessarily as flowery or as effective as one would hope for it to be. And lastly, Ritzer brings in the aspect of globalization and how that has led to a fragmentation of beliefs and therefore a decline within religion. Now, we will discuss some major themes that were explored within the paper. The first one was, of course, the decline of religion, basic definitions of what secularization looks like, what it means specifically in sociology, what it means specifically in Nursi's context, and then what it means for the Muslim community today. We also recognize some causes within that paper where there is globalization as a very, very core cause for such decline. There's fragmentation of belief systems because morality has become incredibly relative, which means people are not as sure about organized religions as they used to be. And that can be a problem for the Muslim identity on a social level. And then positivism, where rationality is promoted to such an excessive extent that it has led up to the decline of faith, a problem that was also identified within Risale-i Nur. Secondly, there is also the impact of secularization, how it affects the individual and collective Muslim identity, and how that has even given way to a Western hegemony. And lastly, there's a concept of resacralization. What happens when this impact can be seen? How do Muslim communities tend to react to it? Do they react with a fundamentalist approach, or do they react with an adaptative approach? So all of that is understood within the realm of the decline of religion, with the realm of secularization to establish context for the debate. Thereafter, social change is discussed because social change is very, very likely linked with the integration of people in society. Usually when social change occurs, we can see that people have their value systems disrupted. And because of that disruption, people may also try their very best to reassert religion with even more dominance than it was ever reasserted before. And we saw that during the decline of the Ottoman Empire, where the Muslim identity was threatened and there was a need for revival. And the same is happening within the 21st century, where we're living in the post 9/11 world, where we're living in a world full of globalization and immense fragmentation of identities. And despite that, what is needed right now is a renewalist approach that counters that kind of fragmentation and that counters that kind of withering Muslim identity. Then the relationship between Islam and modernity is extensively explored, because when we talk about secularization, it is not too difficult to compare it and to put it in the same box as modernity or as a modern phenomena. And in that moment, does one then consider the relationship between modernity and Islam a conflicting one or a collaborative one? As per the Risale-i Nur, it is seen that the relationship between Islam and modernity is primarily a collaborative one, because science and generally even rationale, provides the adequate tools to see the manifestation of religion, to even understand religion better. So in that sense, there is this collaboration which cannot be guised as a conflict. And therefore, if the Muslim community is likely to succeed or to adapt towards the changes, it has to accept modernity. Now, we also see that there are two kinds of possible reactions. They're highlighted by Berger, that when a community, a religious or traditional community, is confronted with social change or with modernization, they may either choose to reject that modernity, or they may either choose to adapt to that modernity. But when we look at Risale-i Nur, the ideal approach is that of adaptation, because rejection is essentially as if you're trying to pretend the problem does not even exist. It is the self-isolation, which is almost a form of denial, and that turns to be much more detrimental for the Muslim identity than just the acceptance of the modern phenomena would be. So in that case, for Nursi, denial and just a mere rejection of secularization was never the answer. And Sayyid Nursi, time and again, made it very clear that the acknowledgement of the current situation of modernity is exactly where Muslims will become equipped enough to deal with these problems. There's also a study of how Quranic texts and how religion can be approached when Muslim Ummah is faced with the challenge of modernity. You could have the approach of modernism, where you're going to strive for an ethical ideal through the use of interpretation. Or you could just revert back to the original basic text or the fundamentals, and therefore go towards a more fundamentalist approach. And lastly, with a mix of two, you could have a more traditional approach. Now, in all of these things, you can not really comment on which approach is really the right or the wrong one, but its utility can be seen very much, dependent upon the context of the situation. Now, we have a couple more themes here, and my favorite one was this jihad and ijtihad discussion that occurred. Now, within this, we firstly need to recognize the transition from the old Sayyid to the new Sayyid. And when that happened, we see this very intense struggle shifting from a political focus to a social focus. It was a very, very realistic shift, because Sayyid Nursi recognized that political change will only mean something when the structures where political change is happening are not themselves entrenched in unfaithfulness or in excessive positivism or just overall rationale that is suffocating. But because political systems at that time, especially under the Kemalist rule, were also not particularly the most accepting of revival of faith, it made it incredibly difficult to have a genuine political struggle that could reap benefits. What was more important at that point then was to preserve individual identity and to engage with an ideological struggle that promoted self-reflection, because that was a much more approachable area of influence. And Sayyid Nursi recognized that aspect. After that, we also see that the shift happened within the Islamic scholarship from fiqh to social theology. So we're not just talking about the social legal aspects of Islam. Interpretation or ijtihad is no longer limited to reinterpreting the law and just analyzing it on very technical and legal grounds. Rather, Nursi wanted those tools to be implemented on a social-political level. And the way to do that was essentially recognizing this tool of rationality and interpretivism at the disposal of an average Muslim, and utilizing that in your own life, in your everyday decisions, to be able to make the best possible choices. So at that point in time, when Muslims were choosing to be much more rigid towards social change rather than going for an interpretative approach that would have been more tolerant of the change, we see how that would have backfired. And that was completely in contradiction to what Risale-i Nur was postulating at that point in time. Moreover, we recognize this conflict between colonialism and identity as well. And this is where the concept of globalization and westernization surfaces, where we also are urged by Risale-i Nur to challenge our definition of modernity and westernization. Now, of course, it is important to remember that modernity in and of itself is a very neutral word. It does not have any positive or negative connotations, just as Risale-i mentions this analogy of two Europes. One Europe being that which is the same Europe which has given us the inventions and the scientific development, but on the other hand, the same Europe which has had produced so much unhappiness, be it in the form of capitalism, be it in the form of excessive poverty, be it in the form of a lot of emotional turmoil that people are facing every single day. So within that context, we're recognizing that modernity could mean very different things. And at this stage, we are challenged by Risale-i to think and reconsider that what we call globalization and modernization today, is it a very holistic version of modernization, or is it just a very, very Western viewpoint of what an identity should be? And in that point, when that Westernization occurs, it is no longer an inclusive globalist kind of discourse. It is a much more hegemonic one. And when things become hegemonic, they're not exactly too inclusive of other people's identities. And that is exactly why the globalization model ends up making feel religious communities much more isolated and marginalized than feeling included. Because one would say that a homogeneous culture would mean that there would be more inclusion. However, when that homogeneous culture is merely representative of one kind of worldview, it ends up being the exact opposite and incredibly discriminatory. Now, after that, the final theme, which is probably the crux of the discussion that arises here, is pluralism. So what happens after all of this conflict is identified, after all of these clashes are identified? What is then one to do? Well, the answer to that is religious tolerance on two levels: tolerance of other religions, of non-Muslim identities, but also tolerance of Muslim identities. Because within that, you have to recognize the multiplicity of truths and realities. And generally, an overall experience of being Muslim can be incredibly fluid. In that sense, you understand that there cannot be this one concrete idea of being a Muslim, because that would be a little akin to the idea of nationalism that Nursi has never really promoted within Risale-i. Time and again, Sayyid Nursi has reasserted that nationalism is actually much more isolating, and therefore having terminologies or identities which focus on restriction, which focus on alienation, is not exactly the answer. So focusing on the ethical aspect of things, on the morality of things, on the acceptance of things, is perhaps the most collaborative way to coexist within the world. Now, this is one of my favorite quotes from Risale-i as I was studying it for this paper. And it's essentially saying that if you say the truth is one, how can the different ordinances of the 4 and 12 schools all be true? The answer: the same water governs in 5 different ways in 5 ill people of different disposition. Thus, for one, the water is the cure for his illness and medically necessary. For another, it is as harmful as poison for his sickness and medically prohibited. For another, it causes a small amount of harm and is reprehensible medically. For another, the water is beneficial and without harm. According to medicine, that is sunnah for him. And for yet another, it is neither harmful nor beneficial. He can drink it with good health, and for him, it is medically permissible. Thus, here the truth has multiplied. All 5 are true. Are you able to say the water is only a cure, only necessary, and it governs in no other way? Just recognizing that there is no stagnant definition of faith or of Islamic identity is perhaps the only realization that may serve to benefit the Muslim identity at the end of the day. And thus we come towards our conclusion of the discussion, where an ideal Muslim identity, both on a collective and individualistic level, promotes proactiveness and ownership of one's position in relation to the current times, rather than denying problems or blaming them on some other community. One takes initiative and control of the Islamic narrative, because that is perhaps the most empowering thing that one can afford to do. Secondly, there is this promotion of coexistence. As the last quotation cites, that Muslim identity could be multiple things, and all of those things would be equally valid, for truth can be multiplied. And then lastly, faith and renewalism is, and again, an aspect that is to be considered, where Muslims make definitely complain about structural issues being faced within the status quo. But rather than changing the structure first, it must be important to first question one's own identity and one's own individual areas of improvement before one tries to deal with structural level issues. And that is pretty much all I have from my paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fatima. And it was such a pleasurable presentation. I took my notes, and thank you very much for the great work. Our next speaker is Aishatu Abubakar Kumo, but unfortunately she's having some technical problems in connecting, unfortunately. So inshallah, maybe we can find her paper as part of the proceedings, as well as Adeni. So we have to close the session, the presentation part. Now, I'd like to just give 3 minutes for each of my presenters to answer 3 questions. Actually, I have my notes in front of me, so I will take the pleasure of asking questions for this session. We are already out of time because of the delay in the previous session, so I would kindly ask you to give your most concise shot in the response part. So I would like to start with Mr. Mohammad. So Mr. Mohammad, when I was listening to your presentation, I realized that you were emphasizing the way Bediuzzaman Said Nursi brought together seemingly separate domains of science and Quran, and your emphasis on intertextuality of the revealed book and the created book as articulated by Nursi, and the way he put forth investigation rather than blind imitation shows us that, you know, that there is a narrative here which goes beyond some of the very recent discussions around science and religion and spirituality. But when I look at your title, what captured my attention was you used the word demystifying, the dynamism of Nursi's approach to belief in the contemporary society. So I understand the implication is that Nursi brought a solution to the contemporary society's relationship with belief, let's say, but still there is something still mystified. So does it imply that the current state of the Ummah does not reflect the level Nursi reached with his Risale-i Nur collection, and still we are struggling with this, struggling with finding the dynamism and finding the solution to the contemporary dichotomies that we face in academics as well as a society? Would you say so?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for raising a very crucial issue regarding my title. Thank you, Professor. And basically, I intended to portray that what Ustad Said Nursi presented in his magnificent magnum opus Risale-i Nur. Still, we have the opportunity to explore the deeper underlying truths, though most of them, so far I can recall, to a greater extent, Ustad's writing have been translated into English. And in the context of my country, Bangladesh, it has been translated not too much, but to a certain extent, it has also been translated in Bangla, our mother tongue, our state language. And in Arabic, probably most of them have been translated. But the thing which I really intended to clarify, that Ustad's thought is so thought-provoking, it contains so deeper messages that still we must have the aptitude to try for the deeper understanding of the messages underlying or contained in the Ustad's use of words, his employment of a story. Why, as for example, what I intended, what I presented today about the Zakum tree, he had splendidly provided very unique presentation, which other commentators of the Quran or other thing did not present earlier. His understanding of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so splendid, is so magnificent, that still we have the opportunity to take it in the after understanding the vibes of the the Ustad's message in the current context, we need to also go for the contextualizations, reinterpretation of Ustad's message in the contemporary vibes of the pluralist world or the globalized world, which we are now calling it today. So I intended to clarify those things from different aspects, as for example, engendering the culture of belief in the context of pluralist society to ensure inner peace and tranquility. Basically, I tried to show that I am a very little learner, very small learner of Ustad's teaching. So I am still trying to understand. I'm just trying to share my views. Since I'm not a great scholar, rather I'm trying to understand the Ustad's message in the current context. How could we reinterpret, retranslate the messages into reality? I just wanted to focus on that particular aspect. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Mohammad. So my next question is to Ms. Fatima Ghani. So it will be in the similar lines, actually. So when we look at the secularization discussions, we all see antagonisms typically, and there are different approaches to whether we are getting secularized or desecularized, radicalized. But when we look at Nursi's discourse, we are seeing that he's somehow transcending most of the dichotomies which define the structure of the discussions in the academics. Now, my question is, I'm just asking whether Nursi's thoughts are well represented in the academics, and would you agree with me if I say that the secularization thesis still needs to digest the perspective of Nursi, which somehow transcends most of the foundations of that discussion and takes it to a different dimension? Would you agree with me?
Right, very interesting question. I'll try to answer it with whatever limited information I do have. So for me in academia, I did feel that in the most mainstream sociology, you do have a lot of studies lacking, particularly from Islamic scholars. And that is not really justified because most scholars that when we talk about religion are primarily Westernized scholars. So it feels a little like excluding that we are not being able to include scholars such as Nursi, who have such an extensive body of work. And that being omitted is almost a criminal activity, I would say, because it is withholding so much knowledge that is very much going to contribute to an actual representation of what secularization thesis is. And that said, coming to your point about what secularization thesis is looking like, can it be revised? Is it really as solid of a statement that we could just look at the world currently and just completely go ahead and say that, okay, yes, everything is secularized now? Not really, I don't think so, because there is, again, the problem of how you define secularization to begin with. What constitutes as secularization? Because knowing that within mainstream sociology as well, secularization is defined usually using a Westernized worldview, again, not from a Muslim perspective. So if we see things from a Muslim perspective, it may even be that instead of secularization, the Islamic identities may be even being reinforced much more intensely. For instance, looking at the very recent Iranian revolution, or even currently the situation within Afghanistan, is if this is not a criticism of secularization thesis, then I would not know what to point out as. So my answers are not really my own answers, but more so the fact that any debate within sociology tends to remain unresolved and really lies within the population that we're speaking of and how they define the term itself. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Wish we had more time to discuss further, but due to the time limitation, I have to switch to my next guest. Mr. Andi, my question, actually, what came as a very interesting input to me was the formation of civil society as part of your narration of socioeconomic balance. So when we say civil society, do we imply that faith is an organizing principle that goes beyond and above state and government? If so, would you agree with me to say that even if the governments and states act unjustly and cause certain socio-economic disbalance or unbalance, whatever, would you say that faith should eliminate that excuse from us? We as Muslims, due to our faith and due to the organizing principle that our faith enables, we should still find ways to reinstate economic, socioeconomic balance. Would you agree with me on that? And actually, my curiosity about your point is, why did you select civil society as part of your narration?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ismail. Yeah. This one was based on actually from the Quran, and I examined in Said Nursi about the meaning of piety, yeah, which is basically coming from the verses of Al-Baqarah from 1 to 5 and Al-Baqarah 177, which is clearly underlined that the most important thing is to respect others, yeah, and also to care about others, and also to be patient, yeah, because sometimes Muslims are not very patient, and also have to control your emotion, not to get easily angry, and of course to always commitment to your promises, yeah. If you promise, you have to commit with what you are saying, and also not repeating the thing that you already know that these are bad. And the last one is always doing good deeds, yeah, to anyone, to the environment. So to me, from self to social contribution is basically from these verses, and Ustad Bediuzzaman Said Nursi emphasized two things: is yu'minuna bil ghaib wa yuqimuna shalah wa mimma razaqnahum yunfiqun. So that's actually the main ideas behind this paper, that in order to be good to others, you have to be good also from yourself. You start from your own self, that you are good, and then you do prayers, and then after that you have to contribute to others, to the orphans, to the needy, to including people who cannot pay their debts, and also people who are collecting alms giving, and people who are strangled with debt. So we have to be cautious about all this, and this is basically piety, as we call it in Islam. And regarding the civil society, actually, in my opinion, there are two here: civil society as a goal, and civil society organization as an organization, as a media. So civil society as a goal, so the states and of course market spheres and private sphere and public sphere should be able to discuss and to do discourse and checks and balances between four spheres. For example, if the government does something wrong, so the market sphere should be able to speak up, the public sphere should be able to speak up, particularly civil society organization, and of course also personal and private spheres should be able to say that you are in a wrong position. And the same thing, if the market is so controlling, yeah, the government should be able to say no, and also private and public sphere should be able to correct, these practices of market sphere. For example, they dominating, or they controlling the whole sustenance, for example, economic basis. So one should not control, one should dominate the whole natural resources. So to me, between civil society as a goal and civil society as a tool, as a means, should be treated equally. And in my opinion, actually, civil society should be corrected with civil community. Said Nursi is always talking about the importance of community, al-ummah. Yeah, this is also based on the Quranic verses. wal takum minkum ummatu yad'una ilal khair wa ya'muruna bil ma'ruf wa yanhauna 'anil munkar. Kuntum khaira ummah ukhrijat linnas tu'minuna ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah. So 4 elements here, in order to establish the so-called civil community, not civil society. I think this is my answer. Thank you for your attention. We are only 3 speakers, but we can have a lot of time to present our ideas. Thank you, Dr. Ismail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andi. Such a nice response to hear from you. It's really inspiring to see this connection between faith and civil society in such a brilliant way. So before closing the session, I will do an announcement, which I should have done in the beginning, maybe. Sorry, it was like, it's my lack of, excuse me for that. So our professor Ismail Latif Hacınebioğlu actually would be the moderator of this session, but unfortunately he's hospitalized for COVID.
Oh yeah, sorry, you're Dr. Ahmad.
Yes, yeah, I'm the replacement, Ahmed Subaşı. Actually, I will be moderating another session tomorrow morning. So let's pray for Ismail Hoca. He's also my professor from university. So let's pray for his quick recovery, inshallah. So I thank you all for the great discussion. Wish we could have more time for further questions, a lot of inspiring points. We want to see you again, inshallah, in the coming symposiums. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you, Muhammad Azharul Islam and Fatima Ghani.
Thank you, sir.
Indonesia.
Thank
Nice
you,
to see you,
Fatima, Miss Fatima Ghani. Thank you, Faisal, Professor. And of course, thanks to our Professor Ahmed.
Ahmad, I'm sorry, Prof. Ahmad. Yeah.
It's my fault.
Inshallah, we have a good connection, inshallah.
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 So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum